Matthew Hancock, first of all, you'll have heard Francis O'Grady say that the rise in the minimum wage doesn't go far enough. Do you think
it's a big step forward. I mean, it's the biggest rise in the minimum wage since before the crash. As a proportion of average earnings, it's gone up each year under this government, and at the same time we've strengthened the enforcement so that businesses that don't pay the minimum wage can't get away with undercutting the responsible and reasonable businesses that do. And it's well on the way to be over £8 by the end of the decade. But it can only happen because we've got a clear plan for making sure that we have a strong and robust recovery. I mean, without that, you can't have an increase in the minimum wage that also creates jobs.
All right, well, you say you're relying on that strong economy and growth. If growth stagnates, will you then not increase the minimum wage in the way you've just proposed to by the end of the decade?
Well, the proposal comes from the Low Pay Commission precisely to take into account those sorts of concerns, and anybody like me who strongly supports the minimum wage should support the Low Pay Commission and the work that they do.
You must support it. I mean, it is an increase, even if it's not quite as far as you would have liked.
Of course we do, yeah. I mean, it's not true to say that we're on target for an £8 minimum wage by the end of the decade. It's gone up 77 pence in the last 5 years, and it's now £1.30 short of £8. So it isn't on target to get that. The government have kept it. Listen to what I've got to say.
Let Toby speak.
So it isn't on the way to doing that, and this government have kept the minimum wage back. But no one who listens to what Matthew Hancock says could possibly believe that he actually thinks the minimum wage as a market intervention is a good idea. You believe in the markets, that you realise politically it's impossible to get rid of the minimum wage, but the Tory party doesn't believe in the minimum wage any more than it believes in the National Health Service. It's just a political convenience. And that's why we do need an economy. We have a different view on the way our economy works. We think that Britain only succeeds when working people succeed, and that's why we want to see it.
Right, yes, you can. But except the point, the timing is interesting, isn't it? We're a day out from the budget. You've announced it a day before. You haven't increased the minimum wage in the way that you promised to do back in 2010. And why should people believe that you are genuinely interested in increasing wages for the low paid? You're doing it as a gimmick.
Well, as I said, we strongly support the minimum wage.
Why are you doing it now?
And the reason that we strongly support the minimum wage is because what is the point of an economic recovery? You know, this is one of the reasons I'm in politics altogether. We want
is this we're all in it together?
We want to see the economy recover so that we can see pay going up at all levels, so that we can see more people in jobs.
When did pay start to outstrip prices? You've been in government since 2010.
Yeah.
Labour have talked about a cost of living crisis. When did wages start to outstrip prices?
Just over a year ago.
Right, so that was nearly 5 years without wages actually overtaking prices.
No, because the latest data show that people's living standards have now recovered to the level from before the crash. And what happens in an economic crash is that, of course, there's a hit on the national income and therefore on people's incomes. We have been turning the economy round from that, and the last thing we want to do is put that all at risk.
Right. What do you think about the minimum wage? I mean, you're a fan of increasing the minimum wage. How would it affect your plan to remove anyone earning minimum wage from paying tax?
I think we're missing the big picture. You know, Labour brought in the minimum wage, and I understand why they did, but what they couldn't have foreseen at the time, or didn't foresee at the time, was that as we opened up our doors to a mass of unskilled labour coming into Britain from southern and eastern Europe, effectively what's happened is the minimum wage has become the maximum wage. There's nearly 1.4 million workers on this. So we've driven down the cost of labour. Market forces have done that. I don't think putting it up by 20p, frankly, makes any difference.
How much would you put it up by?
Well, what I would do is stop the unrestricted flow of unskilled migrant labour, which would make the market actually automatically start to pay people a bit more.
You don't really agree with this state intervention in a minimum wage at all, do you? You would just leave it to the market. You'd remove
I think the irony,
one thing of it, but
I think the irony is that we introduced a minimum wage that actually, rather than helping people on low pay, has put a glass ceiling on them. So I think we've got this wrong, and I want to see. I want to deal with the labour market. There is no need for Britain to have this flow of labour.
Would you get rid of the minimum wage? I mean,
no.
You wouldn't, right? No. So you would have that state intervention. You're happy for that state intervention. even though you said you'd rather have the market actually dictate people's wages?
Well, what I said was that the market has pushed people on minimum wage down. But we can deal with the market forces and we can stop that massive flow of unskilled labour. That would help every working family in Britain.
Right. Well, if you actually say that it should be down to the market, how would it affect your plan? Because there is a plan, is there, from UKIP to remove anyone earning the minimum wage from paying any tax.
Yes.
Right. So,
yes.
I mean, if it goes up, how does that affect your plan? You would still keep increasing the threshold at which people start paying tax?
Well, the minimum wage is the wage that is set by the state. And what we're arguing is that nobody on minimum wage should pay tax. Because actually, all we're doing is taking money from people and then giving it back to them. And I think this would be a very good way of incentivising people on benefit to get to work. But what I want to see is the minimum wage being the exception and not the rule, and you do that by stopping this unrestricted flow.
What do you say, though, to Nigel Farage's point that actually it was the flow of unskilled work and people coming into Britain that actually then kept wages down, if you like, and that's what's been difficult for working people in this country?
Well, I mean, I think the truth is, you know, I'm back in Chesterfield. Many people are concerned about the impact of immigration. When I'm in London, I walk around, I think there wouldn't be a single hotel open if it wasn't for migrant labour. And actually, we were facing a pensions crisis a few years ago because rather than having a large number of people working, a small number at pension age, we had the opposite. So I think that the sort of the simplistic solutions that UKIP propose are not backed by business, they're not backed by people who actually understand the way our economy works, they're not backed by people who understand the way that the world works at the moment. So we do need strong controls on our borders, we do need stronger rules in terms of when people are able to claim benefits, but I think that turning our back on Europe in the way that Mr Farage proposes will be catastrophic.
All I was arguing was that big business and big capital actually likes the unrestricted free flow of labour because for them it's cheaper wages.
Right, okay,
simple as that.
Let's move on to inheritance tax. Would that really be a priority to get rid of inheritance tax for properties up to £1 million?
Well, as the clip said, as the interview before said, this was something that we proposed before, before the last election.
Which
hasn't
happened.
It was in the manifesto, and it hasn't happened under coalition.
And do you think it should now?
Well, I don't know anything about these leaks that are in the papers, but we have said several years ago, we've talked about this, and there's a reason, and that is that many people's homes are dragged into the inheritance tax net without any action of them. It's not their fault that
how many people would be paying inheritance tax if you scrapped it on homes up to £1 million?
Well, I haven't looked at the details recently.
You haven't? Do you know what the percentage is?
I have no idea because, and the reason is, you know, I haven't looked at this recently. I don't know anything about it.
Right. So, as I ask you again, you say it was there. Is it really a priority? Would it be for you when you talk about we're all in this together? You want it to be fair. You want everyone to share the proceeds of growth. Is it really fair to abolish inheritance tax for people who own £1 million properties?
Well, as I said, we proposed this many years ago, and the reason is that people who had worked hard and saved all their lives and wanted to leave something to their children had found, through no fault or desire of their own, that their house had gone up in value. And that's why, when we did announce it back in 2007 or 2006...
Why haven't you done it?
We didn't get through into the coalition agreement. And we committed that, that we'd do it, but then we had a coalition. But but I haven't looked at the figures recently, and the first I heard of it was when I read about it in the paper.
Well, the figures are very, very small in terms of who it would actually help it in those instances. Would this be something that you would back?
Well, as I say, I don't know what the proposal is now, but I think the history of this is really interesting because, of course, the Conservatives trying to claim that the previous government spent too much. Of course, in 2007, at the same time, they were proposing this huge inheritance tax increase. They were promising to back Labour's spending plan. So all of that history about the way that Labour actually ran the economy has just been entirely
And you're going to back, of course, the coalition spending plans if you get them for the first year, wouldn't you, including this?
Indeed, in the first year. But
how would you justify that policy to your supporters?
Well, it isn't a policy, and so it isn't our policy yet. We don't know what the inheritance tax proposals are, so we're not in a position to say whether or not we back them. And
you would abolish inheritance tax altogether, Nigel?
Yes, I would, and actually, it may be a small percentage of the overall country.
It is.
But in London, it is very difficult for anybody doing a reasonable job under the age of 40 to even get on the property ladder.
We are talking about national
and there's
politicians,
a feeling,
aren't we? I mean, what is the percentage for the national?
We are.
As you say,
it's a few percent.
It is.
It's a few percent.
It's about 3%,
yeah,
isn't
it's
it?
tiny.
Even less.
Yeah,
right.
It's tiny.
But that's not covering for everyone,
I would get rid of inheritance tax. Tax has been paid on that money already. And as I say, particularly in areas like London, this will be the only way many people will ever get the chance to get on the property ladder.
Right. You said, Nigel Farage, in your book you could do a deal to support the Conservatives on votes such as the budget in the likely event of another hung Parliament. Is this the sort of thing you would like to see support?
What I'm interested in is the overall size of the annual budget deficit and how that compounds on our national debt. And the one thing that has not been spoken about, despite the fact most of the budget appears to have been leaked already...
So is it a sort of budget you could support as it stands?
And I doubt we'll hear tomorrow, you know, well, George Osborne will not stand up tomorrow and say, I apologise, I've doubled the national debt in my 5 years as Chancellor. He won't say that. And what I would like to see is, are there actually going to be, for the next 5 years, some credible plans to cut the size of a deficit? Because the one thing, yes, the economy is looking better on many of the indicators, but it's all being fuelled by massive, massive deficit financing.
Yeah, what do you say about the debt? I mean, the debt's spiralled, hasn't it? And the deficit hasn't obviously been eliminated in the way you promised to do so. You've got plans to do that in the next Parliament. What do you say on the issue of debt?
Well, to get on top of the debt, the first thing you have to do is get on top of the deficit.
Yeah, but you say you cut it in half and the debt's still going up.
The deficit has come down by half as a proportion of our economy.
But what's happened to debt?
It's come down.
Let's just accept it has under certain figures.
As a proportion of our economy.
But that's not my question, Matthew. But what's happened to debt?
Then you can bear down on debt. But of course, when you have a deficit, you've got to get rid of that first, and then you can get going on the debt.
But that was the objective of the government, wasn't it?
That's why.
That's why you're here.
Hang on,
that's why our proposal is to get to a surplus, which the Labour Party don't agree. They want to run a deficit forever. We want to get to a surplus so that we can then bear down on our debts. And, you know, it's taken tough action so far. We're the only party that has a clear plan of how to deliver it, and the other parties, frankly, just offer chaos.
Right, well, let's just go to Toby Pose on that. What do you say to the issue? What is it in Labour's plans that would suddenly make a dramatic difference to the debt?
Well, I mean, of course we have to get the deficit shrinking. Right. That's what we've said all along. We need to get growth into our economy.
But you don't want an absolute surplus, do you?
Well, we do, but of course...
You don't want an absolute surplus.
Of course we do in the longer term, of course we do. In fact, the last government that had a surplus was the last...
You're changing policy from what Ed Balls said. He said, hold on, this is very important. Ed Balls said you didn't want an overall surplus, you wanted to make sure you kept a deficit. Yeah.
In the long term, our plan is very clearly, by the end of the Parliament, the deficit will be eradicated.
An absolute surplus?
No, the deficit will be eradicated.
So you don't want an absolute surplus, or you do?
I've made it absolutely clear.
Which one? Do you want an absolute surplus or not?
Over the course of this Parliament, by the end of this Parliament, we will have eradicated the deficit. We will have done it in a way that hasn't led to...
So do you want an absolute surplus?
I've just answered that question. We'll eradicate the deficit by the end of this Parliament.
When do you want to reach a surplus?
Well, by the end of this, we're setting out a plan for the 2015 general election for the next 5 years, and by 2020 we will have eradicated the deficit, and in 2020 we will have a plan for the 2020 Parliament.
So you don't want a
surplus,
or you do?
I'm going to have to say thank you and goodbye.